Now it's about MWN and MWL, actually mostly about MWN, because as Niels has already said, MWN is a standard that is the standard of these standards that is the most widely implemented. So that's the standard that we can, of course, discuss in more detail than the MWL standard, but nevertheless, I'm going to present both standards here together. So Niels already said in which context these standards have been developed, and I'm going to present a little bit more detail about the choreographies for the standards. So first, the MWN standard, as was pointed out, is a communication between a label or DSP on one side and a publisher on the other side, and the label wants to know what works the publisher owns, what shares are controlled by the publisher. So the label and the DSP sends a claim request to the publisher, and there are additional features that the standard provides. So the standard also provides a message in which the label or the DSP can use to recall a claim request. So if the label and the DSP realizes, oh, I don't need that information anymore, then the label and or the DSP can send that message, and the publisher doesn't need to do any work related to that musical work. The other thing is that the label or the DSP can update a claim request, so you can send a follow-up message in which you refine your request. And then the publisher looks up the information and returns a message to the label or the DSP, sending as a claim notification message. And here too, the publisher can update claims. So information can be refined. Just to point out that when I talk about labels or DSPs or publishers, sorry, these are just examples. So in general, it's any prospective licensor that can send a request. The publisher stands for any prospective licensor to which this information is forwarded or sent to. And the second comment on this choreography is that the right shares are the core entity for all three standards, as Niels already explained earlier. And Niels also said that sometimes the messages are not sent directly, but via a hub. So the hub is an intermediary point in which the messages from labels or DSPs are rerouted, thank you, to prospective licensors, to publishers. So this also means that a message may be split up, for example, into several messages by a hub, or sent to more publishers, because the hub has information that the label or the DSP doesn't have. And the return path, so to speak, from the publisher to the label or the DSP in that case would also go via hub. So the publisher replies to the hub, and the hub forwards that information to the label or to the DSP that initially sends the message. So the next step is then to look at the messages themselves and to see what information can be conveyed. Niels already showed that at a very coarse level. We can go a little bit deeper in that and look at how the message is structured. So these messages are XML messages, and what you can see on the screen are screenshots which shows the top level elements of the message. All our XML messages start with a message header, which contains information about the message sender, the message recipient, when the message has been sent. So that's the administrative information, so to speak, of the messages. And then we have gradually been taking an approach where the messages have various lists in which the key entities are defined. So that's a little bit similar to what we have, or what I showed you for the BWARM standard, where I said we have database tables relating to musical works, we have database tables relating to sound recordings, and here we have lists of parties, lists of musical works, lists of resources, so sound recordings, musical videos, and lists of releases and lists of requests in the case of a musical work claim request message. So the party list will contain party composites, which have the data for each of the parties involved related to a work or to a resource or to a release. So, for example, rights controller data in a musical work is then linked to a party that is defined in the party list. And the same for the work list, which lists the musical works. And these two elements, as you can see from the bold lines, are mandatory. So your message will have to have a message header, of course. It will have to have a party list with at least one party, a work list with at least one work. And optionally, you can also send information about resources and about releases. So about resources in which the musical work is embodied, or releases in which the particular resources have been released. But that is optional information, which is just to give context to the message recipient about the musical works that for which information is requested. And the last composite is the request list composite, which has then the specific requests. Why do we need an additional composite for that? Well, you may send such a claim request message containing requests for many works, and the publisher may want to respond only to one or two of the requests. So you need to identify the requests. So each request list, the request list has several request composites, and in the request composite, you will have an identifier for the specific request. It will link to a musical work in the work list, and then the publisher that replies to this message can say, I'm sending you the information regarding your request number 3, and you can then match this information. Then on the right-hand side, we have the description of the claim notification message that the publisher sends in response to such a claim request message, and it has the same structure, because that's very efficient then. The composites have the same elements, and you can easily copy data from one message to the other, and it's also more efficient if you have to ingest data in the same format as you have to write it out to reply to such a message. So you have, again, a mandatory party list, a mandatory work list. You have optional resource lists and release lists for specifying additional resource and release information. And now you're replying with write share information. So you need a write share list, which lists a specific write share related to a musical work. So we So you will need a link in that write share which refers to the musical work listed in the musical work list. And at the end of the message, you have a composite which is called write share notification list, which fulfills the same purpose as the request list in the request message. That's where you specify a specific notification related to a specific ride share, point related to specific work, and so on. So that's how the messages are structured. And the next slide shows a few more details about the request message versus the notification message. So that's now on the left-hand side, the request composite, which has, as I mentioned, a mandatory request ID. You can also link it to previous requests. You have, of course, a link between the request and the work. So that's a pointer to the musical work listed in the musical work composite. And then you also have to send conditions which specify the context of your request. And when there is a notification in a response message, you have the ride share notification, which has, again, a notification ID to identify the entity. For further reference, you have a previous notification ID, which is necessary if you're sending update messages. You may remember that from one of the previous slides, that you can send update messages, and then your notification relates to a specific request, which points to the request message, and then you link the ride share information. And then on the right-hand side, you have further details. I can't read them. I took my glasses here, but I suppose that they don't help, and you cannot read this on screen either. So let's not look at these details. Let's look at the next standard, which is MWL. But before I start with MWL, are there any questions that I should address before going to the next standard? There's one question in the room.
One.
So I'm pretty new to this, but I was curious. I saw that there were two fields in the, I think, claim request that were mandatory. It was the party and the work titles. How would a label know? I assume the party would be the composers on the work.
Yes.
So how would they?
For example, so I mean, these are contributors to the different entities for which information is listed here. So it could be contributors to the work, it could be a contributor to a resource, and it can also be the rights controller of a work list.
Okay. So I guess my question is, how would a label necessarily know this information without having gotten a response, from a publisher?
They don't really realistically, because that's their request for work information at that stage. Is just if they have information, it's obviously helpful for a publisher to help match the request, which essentially should be recordings or resources and releases. If you've got work information as a label, that's always helpful. If that don't, I don't think they're actually mandatory in the context of the request, but yeah, that's to be helpful, basically. And in return, in the claim notification, that's what you get, the full right share notification.
That makes sense. I think when I had heard that it was mandatory, I was a little bit unsure how that would work in practice. But
So I think it's critical what Stefan said in that context. The parties here are all the people or companies that have any relationship to any of those entities. So if I'm a record company and I'm asking a publisher, hey, I need a license for this work, I know some other parties, namely the recording artists. I may not know the writers, though I'm slightly more upbeat than Raf there. In many cases, the record companies do know some of the writers and some of that information. They do some research, they do some or whatever they may use to find that information. So some information they have, it would not be authoritative in any way, shape, or form, but they do have an inkling, so to speak. They can provide all of that information in there. The publisher can then complete that information in the response message.
Thank you.
There's apparently the presenter mic isn't as clear, so maybe if you just hold it very close, Stefan. Thanks.
We can take this one, and I hope it's going to be better.
Is that any better online?
Is that better?
Yeah, Stefan, can you hear me?
I need to make we could hear you just about, Jay. Just a sec. I'll need to make you a bit louder. Say something again?
Yeah, so, yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, just confirming, I appreciate Niels and Raf talking about the label perspective, but yes, and they got it just about right. Labels
Thank
do
you.
have some information. They do research leading into the release. And we also have some songs that we release that have been released previously. So we have some data that can be populated and help the process along in some cases. So just pointing that out to confirm what both of them said.
Jay is with Sony Music, by the way.
Yes. Thanks.
And you will have the opportunity to talk more about
Yeah, and I'll
this.
explain a little more about that in a few minutes. Yes.
Okay, but it's good to see that having you online works. Yes, let me see where I can move him. Sunsetting the image. Okay. No. Somehow. Yes, I'm back on my slideshow and I can now talk about MWL. So that's the MWL choreography. It looks very similar. It's just the naming of the cells of the blocks and the lines that have changed. So on the left-hand side, we now have the licensee or the potential licensee, and on the right-hand side, we have the licensor or the potential licensor. And the party on the left-hand side sends then a license request message to the licensor. The licensor checks whether they should grant a license or not. And then they reply with a message that sends a license message. And that license message can either contain the license, or it can also contain, I think, the refusal of a license. And once the licensor has granted the licensor can also send a revocation, so they can terminate the license and revoke the initial grant. In that scenario, in that choreography, it is assumed that the licensee has established an accurate share picture before sending the license request to the licensor, and that's where this three-stage process comes in that is described in terms of the three standards. So normally you would get the share picture by sending an MWN message, and once you have once you know that you can send a license request to this specific party, you use MWL. The message looks very similar to MWN, no surprise. We are using the same structures, it's the same fundamental structure with a message header, then in this case, a message purpose, then the different lists for the elements used or the entities used in the message. So we have again a party list, which will need, which will have the information about the parties described with regards to the works listed in the work list, or the resources listed in the resource list, or the releases listed in the release list, and then also regarding the information in the right share list. On the right share list, you will have right shares with rights controllers, and the rights controllers will be described by elements in the party list. And then you have a condition list, which lists the conditions for which You are, in this case, requesting a message. That's the license request message. And you have a license request list, which then kind of bundles the information and gives them an identifier so that in the response message, the licensor can say this license is with regards to the request number 3 or 4 in the license request message. And on the right-hand side, you can see how the license message is structured. Again, message header, message purpose, parties, works, right share lists, and license lists. There's no information on the resources or on the releases. That's not necessary for giving the license because the license relates to the musical work. And as the last element, again, you have the license list, which lists the individual licenses specified in that message. And that's the structure of this license list. So not to end licenses or not to end licenses rejections. As I said, you can use this to reject licenses.